Why did the air feel different that morning? Sarah couldn't explain it, only that something beneath the calm rhythm of her jog hummed with unease. The rising sun painted the Montana hills gold, the air cool, crisp, and alive with the sound of distant drills from Fort Harrison. It was her favorite part of the day before the world demanded things from her. The uniformed silhouettes running along the fence line, the muted thunder of boots striking earth, it was all familiar, safe, predictable. But not today. Today, the wind felt heavier. The silence between each sound seemed to stretch too long. Sarah Martinez, 28 years old, emergency nurse, military wife, slowed her pace near the curve of the dirt trail. She brushed a strand of wind-blown hair from her cheek and glanced toward the training grounds. The base was waking up, trucks in motion, distant commands echoing across the valley. Her husband, Mike, had left before dawn. Communications duty, another long day. She teased him that morning, telling him not to forget to eat something green for once. He'd smiled, kissed her forehead, and promised to try. Now, alone in the soft light of morning, Sarah let her mind drift until the sound cut through everything. Gunfire. Not in rhythm, not a drill. A staccato burst, sharp and chaotic, then another closer. Her breath caught. She slowed, eyes scanning the horizon. The sound was coming from the northern edge of the training grounds, too far for a controlled exercise. Smoke followed, curling above the trees like a signal flare against the pale sky. Her first instinct wasn't fear, it was movement. Her nursing instinct switched on like muscle memory. Smoke, gunfire, training area, injured soldiers. She veered off the jogging path without hesitation, boots crunching against gravel, lungs filling with the scent of pine and diesel smoke. Branches scraped her arms as she pushed through the underbrush. The smell grew stronger, acrid, metallic, unmistakably wrong. And then she saw it. The wreck. A military transport truck overturned, crushed against the earth, its metal frame bent and hissing. Smoke poured from the engine compartment, rising into the wind. Around it, chaos, soldiers shouting, pulling at twisted metal, dragging their injured out. God, Sarah whispered under her breath, then broke into a sprint. Her shoes slipped in the dirt as she reached the clearing. 3 soldiers lay on the ground, 2 moving weakly, 1 still. The others were shouting orders, their faces smeared with soot. And then she heard it, a sound smaller, weaker than all the noise around it. Help! Her head turned. A soldier, barely more than a kid, was trapped under the rear wheel of the truck. His leg was crushed beneath the weight. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the dirt. "Hey, over here," Sarah screamed, but her voice was lost in the confusion. She ran to him anyway. Up close she could see the name stitched across his torn uniform, Rodriguez. His face was ghost white, lips trembling, eyes darting between her and the burning engine. "You're going to be okay," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I'm Sarah, I'm a nurse. I'm going to get you out." He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. It burns." Sarah's gaze darted to the vehicle. Gasoline was leaking, forming a dark trail that snaked toward the flames licking from the hood. She had minutes, maybe seconds. She looked around for something, a crowbar, a jack, anything, but the soldiers were focused on the others. No one had seen Rodriguez. "Damn it," she muttered, scanning the ground. Nothing but rocks and dirt. Her eyes fell back on the truck. The weight of it was immense, too much for one person. Rational thought told her it was impossible, but rational thought didn't matter. She dropped to her knees beside him, checked his pulse, weak, fatting. His leg was pinned above the knee, blood flow restricted. She recognized the early signs of hypovolemic shock. If he stayed trapped, he'd die before the medics arrived. "You listen to me," she said, gripping his trembling hand. "You're not dying here, you understand, you stay with me." He nodded weakly, tears mixing with sweat. The fire hissed louder, the smell of fuel thickened. Sarah looked at the truck again, at the jagged metal pressed into the dirt, the angle of the wheel. Every instinct screamed, "Don't do this." But something deeper, something beyond training, pushed back. She stood, planted her boots, and wrapped both hands beneath the vehicle's frame. The metal burned against her palms. "Come on," she whispered, "come on." Muscles strained, her back screamed in protest. The ground shifted beneath her, the truck didn't move. She gritted her teeth, every nerve in her body screaming. "You have to pull yourself out when I lift," she gasped. "Push with your arms, you hear me." Rodriguez's voice was faint but determined. I'll try." Then she screamed, not in fear but defiance, and lifted again. For a second nothing happened. Then, impossibly, the frame shifted. Just enough. The weight relented, barely, but enough for Rodriguez to drag himself free. His body twisted, scraping through dirt and broken glass. Blood streamed from his leg, but he moved, inch by inch. "Keep going," she shouted through gritted teeth. "Don't stop." And then the truck groaned, a low metallic warning. Her arms trembled violently, her vision blurred. Black dots swirled at the edges of her sight. "Go," she screamed, "now." Rodriguez made one final pull and cleared the tire. The moment the weight left his leg, Sarah tried to step back, but her muscles gave out. The truck fell. She didn't even feel the impact, just a blinding flash of pain, a crack across her skull, and then darkness. Her last thought was a strange, quiet relief. He's safe. Then nothing. The world dissolved into silence. When Sergeant First Class Williams arrived, he thought it was another drill gone wrong. But the scene that met him stopped him cold. A civilian woman lay unconscious in the dirt, her body twisted awkwardly, blood matting her hair. Beside her, a young soldier, Rodriguez, clutched her hand, crying, shouting incoherently. "She saved me," he kept repeating. "She lifted it, she lifted the truck." Williams knelt beside them. The woman's breathing was shallow, pulse weak but present. He tore a strip from his sleeve and pressed it against the bleeding wound on her head. "Stay with us, ma'am," he murmured. "You did good, real good." He glanced at the overturned truck, the deep grooves in the dirt where her feet had braced, the faint fingerprints smudged along the frame. It didn't make sense. The vehicle weighed nearly 4 tons. No single person could lift that. But there it was, the proof in the dirt. Within minutes, the medevac helicopter thundered overhead, rotor wash scattering dust and debris. Williams waved the medics down as they jumped from the aircraft, assessing the scene. "Civilian female," he shouted over the roar. "Severe head trauma, possible skull fracture. She saved one of ours." The medic looked at Sarah, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "How the hell did she?" "Just move," Williams snapped. "She's running out of time." They loaded her onto a stretcher, securing her head and neck. Rodriguez tried to stand but collapsed in pain, tears streaking his soot-covered face. "Sir, she didn't even know me," he sobbed. "She just came out of nowhere, she." "I know," Williams said quietly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "And that's what makes her different." The helicopter lifted off, carrying Sarah toward the regional trauma center. As it rose, the base commander arrived, Colonel Peterson, his jeep grinding to a halt on the dirt road. "What the hell happened here, Sergeant?" Williams saluted, then gestured toward the smoke. "Training exercise went bad. IED simulation triggered early, but sir," he hesitated. "A civilian intervened, saved Private Rodriguez's life, at considerable cost." The colonel frowned. "Civilian?" "Yes, sir. Name, Sarah Martinez, local nurse. Williams paused, searching for the right words. "She lifted the damn truck, sir, just enough to pull him out." Peterson blinked. "That's impossible." "Yes, sir," Williams said softly. "It is." By afternoon, the story had begun to spread. Through radio chatter, through whispers in mess halls and barracks. A woman, A civilian had saved a soldier's life by lifting an armored transport. The medics confirmed her condition was critical but stable. Head trauma, concussion, possible brain swelling. Rodriguez was in surgery for his leg. Between waves of anesthesia, he kept repeating her name. Sarah, the nurse, she saved me. And across Fort Harrison, soldiers who had never met her, men and women hardened by combat, training, and distance, felt something stir. Respect, admiration, and a quiet question in their own hearts, would I have done the same? The sun fell behind the mountains that night, painting the sky blood-red. The smoke had cleared, but the memory of it hung in the air, heavy, electric. Somewhere in a sterile hospital room miles away, machines hummed softly beside a still figure. Sarah's chest rose and fell with each measured breath. Her hands were bruised, nails cracked, palms blistered raw. And though she didn't know it yet, outside that hospital, across the base, across the barracks, across every soldier's mind, something was already beginning. A movement of gratitude, a quiet promise, and a respect so deep it would shake even the hardest hearts. Because sometimes, the greatest acts of courage don't come from the trained, but from those who simply refuse to look away. The world returned in fragments. A low hum, a rhythmic beeping, and pain dull at first, then sharp, pulsing behind her eyes. Sarah tried to move but felt her body resist. A weight pressed across her chest, a stiffness in her limbs. Her throat was dry. She wasn't sure where she was or if she was even alive. A voice came through the haze. Sarah, hey, sweetheart, can you hear me? She knew that voice. She, known it through laughter, through years, through quiet nights after long shifts. Mike. Her eyelids fluttered, the sterile white ceiling coming into focus. Bright lights, the antiseptic scent of a hospital, machines breathing in rhythm beside her. She tried to speak, but the sound came out broken, a rasp. Where am I? You're in the trauma center, Mike said softly, his hand gripping hers. His eyes were red, sleepless. You were in an accident. His voice faltered, emotion breaking through the practiced calm of a soldier's husband. You saved someone. Memory came back in flashes. The truck, the fire, the screaming metal, the boy's terrified face. And then the pain. Her voice cracked. Rodriguez is he. He's alive, Mike said quickly, tears forming. You did it, you pulled him out. She stared at him, trying to make sense of it. Alive. The word echoed in her head like a prayer. Relief washed over her, followed by exhaustion so deep it felt bottomless. She sank back against the pillow, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. She didn't notice the two doctors standing quietly near the door, observing, exchanging glances. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the attending neurosurgeon, made a note on her tablet before stepping closer. Mrs. Martinez, I'm Dr. Hayes. You've been unconscious for nearly 3 days. You suffered a significant head injury, but the scans look promising. No major swelling now. You're very lucky. Sarah turned her head slightly toward the doctor. Lucky, she murmured, a faint, weary smile forming. He's the lucky one. Dr. Hayes paused, then nodded slowly. Yes, he is. Mike squeezed her hand tighter. The base has been calling nonstop. They're all talking about what you did. What I did, she said faintly, confusion flickering in her eyes. I just helped. Mike hesitated, then took a breath. You didn't just help, Sarah. You lifted an 8,000-pound transport. He stopped himself, shaking his head as if the words themselves felt too unreal to say. Rodriguez told everyone. The soldiers saw it. They can't believe it either. Sarah stared at the ceiling. The image of the truck flashed behind her eyes, the weight, the sound of her own bones straining. Her body trembled as if remembering. I just couldn't let him die, she whispered. And that was all she said. By the second day, the hospital room began to fill not with noise but with presence. Soldiers from the base came quietly, 1 or 2 at a time, to leave cards, flowers, and folded letters. Some saluted as they entered. Others just stood for a few seconds, heads bowed, before leaving without a word. The nurses whispered about it in the halls, that the truck-lifting nurse had become something of a legend overnight. Reporters were calling. The local paper wanted an interview. The Pentagon had even requested a formal report. But Sarah wasn't ready for any of it. She spent most of her time watching the window, the mountains beyond, the sunlight moving across the sterile walls. She wasn't thinking about recognition or cameras. She was thinking about the boy's face, the sound of his scream, the moment the world went black. She had seen death before, countless times in the emergency room, but this felt different. This had happened outside the safety of sterile gloves and trauma lights. It had been chaos, raw, desperate, untrained. And deep down, she knew something had shifted inside her. When Dr. Hayes checked on her that evening, Sarah asked quietly, "Why do they all look at me like that?" The doctor smiled faintly. "Because you did something most people can't even imagine." Sarah frowned. "I didn't think, I just acted." Dr. Hayes nodded. "That's what courage looks like." But courage wasn't what Sarah felt, not really. She felt tired, bruised, haunted by what could have gone wrong. "What if I hadn't been strong enough?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if it crushed both of us?" Dr. Hayes hesitated before answering. "Then you'd still have done the right thing." Sarah looked away. She wasn't sure she believed that. Meanwhile, at Fort Harrison, the story had taken on a life of its own. By morning, it had spread through every barracks, every mess hall. Someone had posted a photo, a grainy shot of the overturned truck, soldiers kneeling beside it, and the blurred shape of a woman in a running outfit lying on the ground. Underneath it, a caption. She lifted it. No one knew who started it, but by noon, it was everywhere, tagged, shared, talked about across military forums. "She's just a nurse," someone asked in disbelief. "She's the nurse," another replied. Sergeant Williams became the unofficial spokesperson for the incident. Reporters called him. Commanders briefed him. He gave the same answer every time. "Yes, I saw her. Yes, she lifted it. No, I don't know how. Adrenaline, instinct, maybe something else. All I know is she saved one of ours." Those last words stuck. One of ours. That phrase carried weight in the military. It meant brotherhood, sacrifice, honor. But now it meant something bigger. A civilian woman had embodied those same values, without rank, without training, without orders. And that unsettled something in the best possible way. On the third morning, Sarah woke to find Rodriguez sitting beside her bed, his leg bandaged, his uniform replaced by hospital clothes. He looked different, older somehow, humble, raw. When their eyes met, he smiled weakly. "Hey." She smiled back, tears welling immediately. "You're supposed to be resting." He shrugged. "Couldn't, had to see you." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with emotion, unspoken gratitude, disbelief. "I don't remember much," he said quietly. "Just your voice, you telling me to push. I thought I was going to die." Sarah swallowed hard. "I did too." He laughed softly, a sound cracked by emotion. "You know they're calling you a hero." Her eyes dropped. "Please don't." "Why not?" he asked. "Because heroes don't think about it," she said, shaking her head. "They just do what needs to be done, and then they live with it, whatever happens after." Rodriguez looked at her, studying her expression, the tired eyes, the quiet strength. "Maybe that's exactly why you're one," he said. She didn't answer, she just squeezed his hand. Outside the hospital, things were escalating in ways Sarah didn't know. Soldiers were organizing something unofficial, unsanctioned but deeply personal. Sergeant Williams was leading it. He spent the night making calls, sending messages across units and nearby bases. "She's stable," he told them. "She's gonna make it. We're doing something for her." At first it was meant to be small, just Rodriguez's squad, but as word spread, more wanted in. "She's one of us now," a corporal said. "She bled for us," another replied. "We'll show her what that means." By sunrise, what had started as a simple plan was growing into something far greater. A gathering, a salute, a statement of gratitude unlike anything they'd ever done before. No one had ordered it, no one had to. Because for every soldier who had ever pulled someone from danger, for every medic who'd ever risked their life under fire, Sarah's story reminded them why they served and who they served for. Back in her hospital room, Sarah stared at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman who looked back at her didn't feel like the same person who had gone jogging that morning. Her face was pale, bruised, her eyes looked older, but behind them there was something else, a quiet resolve. She wasn't proud of what she'd done. Pride didn't fit. She just couldn't stop wondering why she had been there, why fate had chosen that exact moment, that exact place. Her thoughts drifted back to Rodriguez's trembling voice. "You saved me." And to Mike's whisper when she first woke up. "They're all talking about you." But the truth was simpler. She hadn't meant to become a story. She just refused to walk away. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a mix of guilt and gratitude. Guilt that she'd survived. Gratitude that he had too. In the quiet, her fingers brushed the edge of the bandage on her temple. She closed her eyes. The memory of the truck's weight lingered, the burning in her muscles, the blinding pain. But underneath it all, there was peace. Because sometimes doing the right thing hurt. And that hurt, that sacrifice, meant it was real. Outside, dawn light broke across the horizon again, the same color as it had the morning of the accident. The sky didn't care about heroism or headlines. It just kept moving. And as the world stirred awake, hundreds of soldiers began preparing for something she couldn't yet imagine. A tribute. A thank you. A moment that would change her life again, but this time she would be awake to see it. Why were there so many footsteps in the hallway? Sarah noticed it before she saw anyone, the sound of boots, hundreds of them moving with purpose. Not rushed, not chaotic, synchronized. She turned her head toward the window. The morning light had softened into gold, falling gently across the pale hospital walls. Everything looked ordinary except it was. She could feel it in the air. A quiet hum of anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. Mike was sitting beside her, sipping coffee gone cold. He looked nervous, though he kept pretending to scroll through his phone. "What's happening?" she asked softly. He glanced up. "You're pretending nothing's going on," she said, smiling faintly. "You're terrible at pretending." Mike exhaled slowly. "You'll see soon enough." "See what?" Before he could answer, there was a gentle knock on the door. Dr. Hayes stepped in, clipboard in hand, and behind her, Sergeant Williams, dressed in full uniform, his ribbons neatly aligned, his expression calm but his eyes glowing with restrained emotion. "Morning, Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Hayes said. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Sarah replied. "Head's not spinning anymore. I might even survive your hospital food." The doctor laughed softly, but her tone grew more formal. "That's good, because you'll need your strength today." Sarah frowned. "My strength?" William stepped forward then, his posture perfectly straight, voice steady. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant First Class Williams, Fort Harrison." Sarah nodded. "I remember you were there that day." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "And on behalf of every soldier at that base, I'm here to thank you, properly." She blinked, confused. "Thank me for what?" He paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because words felt too small. "For doing what most of us pray we'd have the courage to do." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Mike. "I didn't do anything special. He was trapped. I was there." William smiled gently. "Ma'am, that's exactly what makes it special." Before she could respond, Dr. Hayes interrupted softly. Sarah, the soldiers have been arriving since before dawn. Sarah's brow furrowed. Arriving for what? The doctor looked at her kindly. They came for you. Sarah froze. Williams continued. No one ordered it. No one organized it through command. They just came. From Fort Harrison, from nearby installations, even from out of state. They wanted to stand for you to honor what you did. The words hung in the air. Impossible, unbelievable. Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. That can't be real. But it was. Outside in the hospital's parking lot, soldiers were forming in perfect rows, hundreds of them. Their boots gleamed. Their uniforms were pressed. The early morning wind tugged at flags held steady in their hands. It wasn't loud. There were no shouts, no orders barked, just quiet coordination, a kind of reverent discipline, as if they were preparing not for ceremony but for prayer. Sarah couldn't see it yet, but she would. Down in the parking lot, Sergeant Williams checked his watch. 8:45 a.m. The first wave had arrived at 5. Units from 3 nearby bases had joined them, driving through the night to be here. Marines, Army, Air Force, even a few Navy uniforms among them. Rank didn't matter today. It wasn't about medals or duty. It was about gratitude. He walked between the rows, counting silently. 472. More vehicles pulling in. They would hit 500 before the hour. Formation looks good, a corporal said beside him. Williams nodded. We're not here to look good, we're here to mean it. Roger that, Sergeant. The air was cool, the kind that carried sound far and clean. From where he stood, Williams could see the hospital windows glinting in the morning light. Somewhere up there, behind glass and machines, lay a woman who didn't understand why this was happening, a woman who would never have asked for it. That humility made it matter even more. Upstairs, Sarah was trying to make sense of it. They're soldiers, she said softly. Real heroes. They've been through things I can't imagine. I'm just a person who acted, Williams said. Sometimes that's what it takes to remind the rest of us why we wear the uniform. Dr. Hayes approached the bed, her tone gentle but firm. You've been cleared to go outside for a short time, if you're feeling strong enough. Sarah hesitated. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure if it was from fear or disbelief. Outside. Mike took her hand. You should see it, Sarah. You'll never forget it. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can handle all that attention. You don't have to handle it, he said softly. Just accept it. They brought her a wheelchair. Rodriguez insisted on being there too, still recovering, still pale but determined. When the elevator doors closed, the silence between them felt sacred. Rodriguez stared straight ahead, holding a folded flag in his lap. His hands trembled slightly. Sarah watched him, her heart twisting. You shouldn't be up yet. He smiled faintly. Neither should you. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. What waited outside stole the breath from her chest. At first she thought she was seeing wrong, that her eyes were playing tricks. Rows upon rows of soldiers filled the parking lot, stretching as far as she could see. Hundreds of uniforms, perfect formation, flags snapping softly in the breeze. And then the sound. The synchronized, thunderous click of 500 boots coming to attention. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears spilled instantly. William stood at the front, his voice carrying like steady thunder. Fort Harrison and Allied commands, present arms. In one motion, every soldier raised their hand to salute. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was sacred. The kind of silence that says everything words can't. Sarah's heartbeat thundered in her ears. The tears blurred everything, the sunlight, the faces, the endless sea of soldiers standing for her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Mike knelt beside her, his own eyes glistening. They came to thank you, Sarah, all of them. She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. I just wanted to help. William stepped forward, voice steady but filled with feeling. Ma'am, that's why we're here. Because that's what courage is, doing what needs to be done when no one tells you to. The soldiers didn't move. Their salutes held steady, unbroken. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Sarah's tears fell freely now, her hand pressed to her heart. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. She didn't need words, the gesture said enough. She bowed her head slowly, acknowledging the salute with quiet grace. Around her, even the wind seemed to pause. A single voice broke the silence. Permission to speak, Sergeant. It was Rodriguez. Williams turned and nodded. Permission granted. Rodriguez pushed himself up from his wheelchair, pain flashing across his face but pride burning brighter. Two soldiers stepped forward to steady him, but he waved them off. He stood tall as his injured leg would allow, and faced the crowd. This woman, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. This woman saved my life. I thought I was done for, trapped under that truck waiting to die, and then she showed up, out of nowhere. He looked down at Sarah. She didn't ask who I was, didn't hesitate, she just lifted it. A murmur ran through the ranks. Rodriguez continued, emotion thick in his voice. She talked to me, kept me calm, told me I was going to make it, and when I couldn't move, she took the weight, all of it. I watched her do the impossible. He turned back to the soldiers. She didn't have to be there that morning, but she was, and because she was, I'm alive. He turned again, this time to her, and raised his hand in a perfect salute. 500 soldiers followed. The sound of it, that collective motion, that thunderous discipline, echoed through the parking lot, through the walls, through her very chest. Sarah's breath caught. Her vision blurred completely. She tried to speak, but emotion stole her words. William stepped beside her and spoke quietly, just for her to hear. You didn't just lift that truck, ma'am. You lifted all of us. Her tears came harder then. Not from pride, not even from gratitude, but from something deeper, the weight of understanding that what she had done, in one impossible moment, had reached hundreds of souls who needed reminding that courage still existed. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly as the soldiers held their salutes, motionless. It was the most profound silence she had ever heard. Dr. Hayes watched from the hospital steps, her eyes glistening. She had seen patients heal through medicine, through surgery, through rest. But what she saw now was something else entirely, a human soul being healed by recognition, by grace. Sarah looked up, her hands trembling. Her voice was soft, raw, and honest. I'm not a hero, she said. I just didn't want him to die. Colonel Peterson, who had been standing near the front, took a step forward. And that, he said firmly, is what makes you one. The soldiers slowly lowered their salutes. But no one left. They began to move one by one in small groups, walking toward her, shaking her hand, thanking her. Some smiled through tears, others said nothing at all. Each one carried a story, a reason for being there. And in that moment, Sarah realized this wasn't just about her. It was about all of them, about the bond between courage and compassion, between service and humanity. Her strength had saved a life. Her humility had reminded hundreds of soldiers what theirs meant. And though she still didn't understand why fate had chosen her that morning, she finally understood something deeper. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply not walk away. How do you thank someone who saved your life? Rodriguez didn't know, and neither did the 500 soldiers standing in that parking lot, eyes burning, hearts open, hands still tingling from their salute. Sarah sat in silence, tears streaking down her cheeks, her hand still pressed to her heart. The wind moved softly now, stirring the flags overhead. It was as if even the air had grown gentler, aware that something sacred had just taken place. Colonel Peterson took a single step forward, his boots echoing faintly on the asphalt. He cleared his throat, not because he needed to, but because words seemed too fragile to carry the weight of the moment. "When you've served long enough," he began, his voice steady, "you learn to tell the difference between strength and courage." He turned toward the soldiers, then back to Sarah. "Strength is trained, courage is chosen, and today we stand for someone who chose courage without anyone asking her to." The soldiers didn't move, but the silence deepened, carrying every word like scripture. "You weren't part of our ranks," the colonel continued, "but your act reminded us what those ranks are supposed to mean: service, sacrifice, compassion. You made every one of us remember why we took the oath in the first place." Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears, her breath catching on a quiet sob. Peterson lowered his head slightly, not as a commander, but as a man. "On behalf of every soldier here, and those who couldn't be, thank you." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't the thunder of celebration. It was soft, reverent, alive with feeling. Hundreds of hands coming together like a heartbeat. Sarah looked from face to face, men and women of every rank, every background, and felt the same question rising in her chest. Why me? She whispered it under her breath. Not realizing the microphone a soldier held nearby caught the sound. "Why me?" Peterson smiled faintly. "Because you were there, because you didn't run, and because sometimes the world needs a reminder that heroes don't always wear uniforms." The ceremony might have ended there, but something powerful was stirring among the soldiers. They didn't disperse. They didn't return to their vehicles. Instead, one by one, they began stepping out of formation, 10 at a time, 20, then more. Each soldier approached her wheelchair quietly, as if stepping into church. They didn't need permission. The tribute had become something beyond rank and regulation. A young female private was the first to kneel beside her. Her uniform looked new, the creases still sharp, the boots barely scuffed. Her eyes were bright, trembling with emotion. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I joined because I wanted to make a difference. But today I realized it's not just about fighting, it's about protecting. And you showed me what that looks like." Sarah tried to respond, but her throat tightened. She reached out and took the girl's hand instead, squeezing it gently. The private smiled through tears and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me who I want to be." Then she stood, saluted quietly, and stepped aside for the next. A middle-aged sergeant replaced her, his uniform faded, his face lined from years of sand, sun, and loss. He crouched down beside her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough but kind, "I've seen things out there that take the word bravery and twist it. I've watched men freeze under fire. I've watched others give everything. But what you did," he paused, searching for the words, "that was different, that was heart." He reached into his pocket and held something out, a small circular token, worn from years of touch. "This is my challenge coin," he said quietly. "I've carried it through 3 deployments. It's my reminder of who we are and why we serve. But today it belongs to you." Sarah shook her head instantly. "I can't take that." "You already earned it," he said. "You're one of us now." He pressed the coin into her palm and closed her fingers around it. Then, without another word, he saluted and walked away. Sarah stared down at the coin, the metal warm from his hand, and felt something shift inside her. A soldier's token of belonging, a piece of a brotherhood she'd never expected to be part of. And that was just the beginning. More soldiers came. A lieutenant who had lost friends overseas. A medic who said Sarah reminded her why she joined the medical corps in the first place. A young father who whispered that his daughter wanted to be a nurse, and now he hoped she would grow up to be like Sarah. Each one had something to say. Each one left something behind: a pin, a patch, a handwritten note, a coin. Within an hour, Sarah's lap was full of them. She didn't know what to do with her hands anymore. She just kept thanking them, her voice shaking, her tears falling freely, her heart somehow both breaking and healing at once. Rodriguez sat beside her the whole time, silent, watching the endless stream of soldiers. Every so often, one would stop to shake his hand too, a wordless recognition of shared survival. When it became too much, Sarah looked at him helplessly. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "None of us think we do, but we stand anyway." By late morning, the crowd had begun to thin, though hundreds still lingered. Williams approached again, his expression softer now. "Ma'am, I think you've officially broken the record for most soldiers crying at a single event." Sarah laughed through her tears. "I didn't mean to." "That's the thing about real heroes," he said. "They never do." He glanced at the small mountain of challenge coins and tokens in her lap and whistled quietly. "Looks like you've been drafted." She looked down, shaking her head. "I don't belong to the military." "No," Williams said, "but the military belongs to you now." Colonel Peterson returned, carrying something in both hands. It was large, polished wood with a brass plate across the front, a plaque. He set it gently on her knees. The reflection of sunlight glimmered across the engraved names. "These are the signatures," he said, "of more than 1,000 soldiers, not just from here, but from bases across the country. Every one of them wanted to sign this to thank you." Sarah ran her fingertips over the brass, tracing the grooves of the engraved words. "To Sarah Martinez, who reminded us that courage doesn't come from rank, but from heart." Her breath caught, her vision blurring again. "This is too much," she said softly. Peterson smiled. "It's not enough." The next to approach was Rodriguez. He stood carefully, still using crutches, his expression unreadable. When he reached her, he took a long breath, pulled something from his pocket and held it out. It was his own challenge coin. The metal gleamed faintly, scratched and worn. "I want you to have this," he said. Rodriguez, "No." He shook his head, eyes glistening. "You gave me my life. The least I can give you is my belonging." He placed the coin in her hand. "This one means family, honor, survival. It means you made it out with us." Sarah's lips trembled. "I don't know what to say." "Just promise me one thing," he said softly. "Don't ever think you didn't deserve to be there that day." She couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Rodriguez stepped back, saluted her one last time and whispered, "Welcome to the family." And then something unexpected. Other soldiers, watching the exchange, began to move again. One by one, they approached her, each placing their own challenge coin in her lap. Some pressed them into her hand silently, others whispered short words, "Thank you, for all of us, for reminding us." Different ranks, different branches, all leaving a piece of themselves behind. Within minutes, her lap shimmered with dozens of coins, each one a story, a promise, a piece of trust. Sarah looked down at them, her reflection scattered across the polished surfaces. She whispered, almost to herself, "I didn't lift that truck alone." Williams heard her and nodded slowly. "No, ma'am, but what you lifted reached all of us." By noon, the parking lot had thinned, but the quiet hum of gratitude still hung in the air like incense. Sarah sat motionless, exhausted, clutching a handful of coins as if afraid they might disappear. Her heart ached, but not from pain. The formation had ended, but the moment hadn't. The echo of boots and silence lingered like a heartbeat through the air. Even after the soldiers lowered their salutes, no one moved for a long time. The stillness was its own kind of reverence. Sarah sat in the wheelchair, hands trembling, eyes still wet. The tears had dried, but the emotion hadn't left her body. It pulsed through every breath. When the first soldier stepped forward, he didn't speak. He just saluted again, quietly this time, then extended his hand. She took it, and for a second he seemed unable to let go. His voice cracked when he finally whispered, "Thank you." Then another came, and another. Within minutes, a steady line formed, soldiers waiting their turn to meet the woman who had reminded them what courage looked like when no one was watching. No cameras, no speeches now, just raw human connection. The first to reach her after that was a young private, barely 20, freckles across his face, hands shaking. He held out a small metallic disc. "Ma'am," he said, voice trembling, "this is my challenge coin. It's supposed to stay with me through service, but I want you to have it." Sarah looked at him, startled. "I can't take that." "You already earned it," he said softly. "You saved one of us. You're one of us now." He pressed the coin into her palm before she could refuse. It was warm from his hand, heavy with meaning. She closed her fingers around it, unable to speak. Then came another soldier, then another. Different ranks, different branches, different faces, all carrying the same silent gratitude. Each one handed her something, a patch, a coin, a bracelet, tokens of service and brotherhood. Some saluted, others simply nodded. But every exchange carried the same unspoken truth, that courage wasn't measured by uniform or rank, but by choice. Within half an hour, Sarah's lap was filled with metal coins, gold, silver, bronze, engraved with unit crests, mottos, and emblems. Each one represented a soldier who had faced fear, who had lost friends, who had seen darkness, and who now saw a piece of that same courage reflected in her. She looked down at the growing pile, stunned. "I don't deserve these." A tall officer standing nearby, a major by his insignia, shook his head. "Ma'am, none of us ever feel like we deserve the things that matter most." She smiled faintly, but her eyes were shining again. Nearby, Dr. Hayes wiped her face quietly. She wasn't just watching a patient recover. She was watching something sacred unfold, a living exchange between courage and gratitude. Colonel Peterson stepped forward next, his boots crunching softly on the pavement. "Mrs. Martinez," he said formally, "on behalf of every man and woman under my command, I want to thank you. What you did defies explanation, and yet it defines everything we stand for." He nodded to Sergeant Williams, who stepped forward carrying a polished wooden plaque wrapped in cloth. The colonel continued, "There isn't an award in our system that properly honors what you did, but we made something of our own." He gestured for Williams to reveal it. The sergeant pulled away the cloth, and Sarah gasped. It was a beautifully crafted plaque, framed in brass and wood, engraved with the emblem of the United States Armed Forces. Across its surface were hundreds of signatures, handwritten, engraved, etched with precision. "At last count," the colonel said, "over 1,000 soldiers from across the region have signed this. Every name represents someone who heard your story and wanted to thank you." Sarah reached out with trembling fingers, tracing the lines of names, each one carved into permanence. Her throat tightened. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You already said it," the colonel replied. "The day you acted, you spoke louder than words ever could." Behind him, a gentle wind swept through the rows of soldiers, rippling flags and catching sunlight on the coins in Sarah's lap. The colonel paused, then lowered his voice. "There's one more thing." He stepped aside. Rodriguez moved forward, slow, limping slightly but proud. He stopped in front of Sarah and saluted once more. Then, with quiet ceremony, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small coin, dark bronze, worn smooth by time and touch. "My challenge coin," he said softly. "It's from my unit. You're supposed to earn it by standing beside us in danger. You did that and more. I want you to have it." Tears welled instantly in her eyes. "Rodriguez, I can't." But he shook his head. "You can, because I'm alive because of you. You didn't just save my life, you gave me back everything I thought I was about to lose. That means something we don't forget." He placed the coin gently in her hand. "It's yours." For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them said everything words couldn't. Then something unexpected happened. A sergeant stepped forward from the second row and dropped his coin onto Sarah's lap. Then another soldier followed, then another. One by one they came, no words, no ceremony, just quiet respect. The sound of coins striking softly against one another filled the morning air like distant rain, metallic echoes of gratitude. Sarah looked down, her lap overflowing with gleaming circles of bronze, silver, and gold, symbols of trust, sacrifice, brotherhood. Her breath came shallow. "Please," she said softly, shaking her head, voice trembling, "you don't have to do this." But Sergeant Williams said quietly, "Yes, ma'am, we do." By the time it ended, the sun had risen fully, warm against her face. The ceremony that had begun as a tribute had turned into something more profound, a communion of courage between soldiers and a woman who had acted out of nothing more than compassion. But hours later, when the crowd finally began to disperse, Sarah sat quietly beneath the shade of a nearby tree, surrounded by the remnants of that morning, folded flags, coins stacked neatly in her lap, and the plaque balanced across her knees. Mike knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded, her gaze distant. "I don't think I'll ever forget today." He smiled softly. "Neither will they." She looked at the coins again. "Each one of these belongs to someone who's seen things I can't imagine, and they gave them to me." "They didn't give them," Mike said gently. "They shared them. You earned your place among them, Sarah, whether you realize it or not." She exhaled slowly, watching the soldiers in the distance. "I never meant to be part of their world, but somehow, for a moment, I was." Mike nodded. "You showed them something real. That courage isn't just trained, it's human." But later, as the parking lot emptied, Sarah asked to be alone for a while. Dr. Hayes hesitated but agreed, knowing Sarah needed quiet. The air was still, the sounds of the tribute fading into memory. A few flags flapped softly in the breeze. The scent of cut grass and summer heat filled the silence. Sarah held one of the coins between her fingers, Rodriguez's coin, and turned it slowly in the sunlight. The emblem caught the light, glinting like fire. It wasn't the metal that mattered. It was what it represented, a connection between her small act and something far larger than herself. For years she had worked in the emergency room, saving lives as part of a system. But that day she'd acted alone, no protocol, no backup, just instinct and fear and something deeper, love for life itself. She realized now that maybe courage isn't about strength at all. Maybe it's about refusal, refusal to walk away, to accept loss, to wait for someone else to act. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mind if I sit?" It was Sergeant Williams. He lowered himself to the curb beside her, resting his cap on his knee. "Hell of a morning," he said quietly. Sarah smiled faintly. "That's one way to put it." He nodded toward the coins. "You know, in my 20 years of service, I've never seen anything like that. Soldiers giving away their challenge coins, that's not protocol. That's personal." "I didn't know what to say," she admitted. "You didn't need to," Williams said. "Sometimes silence speaks louder. That's why we salute the way we do. It's not words, it's respect." Sarah looked down at the plaque again, running her hand over the engraved names. "They said I was brave, but I don't feel brave." "Good," Williams said with a half-smile. "Because real courage never feels like courage in the moment. It just feels like doing what needs to be done." They sat in silence for a while. The last soldiers were climbing into their vehicles, engines starting, gravel crunching beneath tires. The sound faded until it was just wind and memory. Williams stood, adjusted his uniform, and gave her one final salute. "Thank you for reminding us, ma'am. Sometimes we forget what we're fighting for." Sarah's eyes glistened as she nodded. "Thank you for reminding me what it means to belong." And then he was gone, walking toward his vehicle, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. Sarah stayed there a long while, the coins gleaming softly in her lap, her reflection caught in the polished brass of the plaque. She realized something then. something she hadn't understood until that moment. That day, she hadn't just lifted a truck. She had lifted something invisible, something heavy, something carried quietly by every man and woman in uniform, the weight of duty, of sacrifice, of remembering why. And for the first time, she felt it too. That night in the hospital room, she placed the coins gently on the bedside table. The light from the window caught them, scattering tiny reflections onto the walls, little flashes of gold, like stars. Mike had fallen asleep in the chair beside her, his hand still in hers. She whispered into the quiet, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And then she closed her eyes, not in exhaustion but in peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you've done something that truly matters. For the first time in days, the hospital felt calm. No more camera flashes, no more footsteps echoing down the hallway, just the steady rhythm of machines and the faint whisper of evening wind against the glass. Sarah lay awake, the coins still gleaming softly on the table beside her bed. They caught the fading sunlight, scattering faint golden reflections across the sterile white walls, like quiet reminders of the morning that had changed everything. Her head still ached from time to time. Her body was weaker than she liked to admit, but there was something else now, a steadiness she hadn't felt before. The world outside the hospital had shifted, and though she didn't yet understand how much, she could feel the edges of it pressing in. A nurse entered the room carrying a small vase of flowers. "More for you," she said, setting them beside the others. "You might need a second room soon." Sarah smiled softly. "From who this time?" The nurse scanned the card. "It just says, 'From one mother to another, thank you for saving someone's child.'" Sarah exhaled slowly. "People are kind." The nurse nodded. "No, people are grateful." When she left, Sarah turned her gaze back toward the window. The world looked the same mountains, same clouds drifting lazily above Fort Harrison. But she knew, somehow, that 1,000 unseen hearts were looking back at her differently now. By the next morning, the media had caught up. The local paper had run the story first. "Civilian nurse saves soldier in training accident." A simple headline, understated. By noon, the national networks had picked it up. By sunset, it was everywhere. The woman who lifted a truck. An ACT of impossible courage. The nurse who brought an army to tears. Each outlet added its own angle, miracle, heroism, strength, but the truth remained the same. One woman had done something extraordinary, and the world needed that story. In a time when headlines were filled with conflict and division, Sarah's story felt like a collective breath, a reminder that goodness still existed, unfiltered, unplanned, and pure. Mike tried to shield her from the noise, but it was impossible. The hospital phone rang constantly. News stations wanted interviews. Talk shows offered flights, hotels, primetime slots. Sarah refused them all. "I didn't do it to be seen," she told Mike, "and I don't want to turn it into a story that belongs to someone else." He nodded. "They just want to understand why you did it." She gave a small, tired smile. "So do I." Meanwhile, something deeper was happening within the military community. Across the country, units began sharing her story during morning briefings. Drill sergeants used her name as an example when teaching recruits about moral courage, the kind that doesn't wait for orders. At Fort Harrison, a small bulletin board near the main gate had been transformed. Photos of Sarah, running trail snapshots taken by soldiers during early drills, were pinned beside handwritten notes. "For reminding us what we fight for. For showing that courage wears no uniform. You didn't just lift a truck, you lifted us." Every morning new notes appeared, some anonymous, some signed, all heartfelt. The base chaplain began leaving fresh flowers beneath the board each Sunday. He called it the honor wall. A week later, Dr. Hayes cleared Sarah for discharge. Her scans looked good. The swelling had subsided. "You're healing faster than I expected," the doctor said, smiling. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Sarah smiled faintly. Maybe gratitude's the best medicine. Dr. Hayes studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You know, most people talk about recovery in physical terms. But what happened to you, that kind of experience leaves marks you can't see." Sarah glanced at her reflection in the darkened window. "I know, I feel them." Dr. Hayes stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It's okay to be proud of what you did, Sarah, even if you don't want to call it heroism." Sarah turned to her, her expression soft. "I'm not proud. I'm thankful for the chance to have done something that mattered." But when she finally left the hospital, the world outside seemed brighter than she remembered. The air smelled of pine and earth. The sunlight warmed her skin. Rodriguez was waiting for her at the entrance, standing carefully on crutches, his legs still braced but healing well. When she saw him, she smiled, genuinely this time. "Shouldn't you be in therapy?" she teased gently. He grinned. "Already did it, thought I'd walk you out instead." As they stepped toward the exit, Sarah froze. On the walkway just beyond the hospital doors, rows of flowers lined the path, wildflowers, roses, carnations. No organized arrangement, just color and fragrance left by strangers. Notes were tucked among the petals, small cards with messages scrawled in all kinds of handwriting. Some simple, "Thank you." Some longer, "You reminded me to be brave again." Sarah's throat tightened. Who did all this? Rodriguez smiled. "Everyone who heard, everyone you touched without even knowing." They walked slowly through the flower path. Nurses came out to watch. Soldiers passing by on errands stopped and saluted quietly. Sarah felt humbled to her core, not because of the attention, but because of what it meant. Every gesture, every flower, every note was a reflection of something she hadn't realized her act had ignited: hope. But that evening back home, the silence of her own living room felt unfamiliar. The smell of coffee still lingered from the morning Mike had left for duty. Sunlight slanted across the walls, catching on the stack of mail that had grown during her hospital stay. On top sat an envelope without a return address. Inside, a folded sheet of paper and a small bronze pin shaped like a pair of angel wings. The note read, "For the angel who lifted more than a truck, you lifted the spirit of every soldier who's ever doubted why they serve." Sarah sat for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. Then she placed the pin gently beside the challenge coins on the shelf. The collection glittered softly under the lamplight, each coin a story, each symbol a silent bond. For a moment she thought of the young soldiers who had pressed those coins into her hands, the trembling private, the stoic officer, Rodriguez with his tearful salute. Each one had shared something of themselves, a piece of their identity, their pride, their humanity. And in return she had given them something intangible, a reminder. That heroism wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it looked like a nurse running toward danger instead of away from it. But weeks passed. Life began to return to something like normal. Sarah went back to physical therapy. Her balance was improving, her energy too. But something had changed in her. She found herself more present, more aware. The trivial things, traffic, deadlines, small annoyances, no longer carried weight. Every time she stepped outside, she noticed the world differently. The sound of soldiers training in the distance, the flutter of flags over Fort Harrison, each reminded her of the fragile thread that connected them all. Sometimes she'd see Rodriguez at the base hospital, now walking without crutches, helping other recovering soldiers with their therapy. He'd always grin when he saw her. "You started all this," he'd joke. She'd shake her head. "No, you did, I just showed up." But he knew, and she knew, that showing up had made all the difference. But One evening, while sorting through the mountain of letters that had arrived since her discharge, Sarah found one that stopped her cold. It was written in neat, slanted handwriting on military stationery. Dear Mrs. Martinez, you don't know me, but I'm a soldier who served in Afghanistan. I've seen men do things I didn't think possible, but your story reminded me that courage isn't just something we wear on our sleeves. It's something anyone can carry inside them, even when they don't realize it's there. Thank you for showing that to the world. Respectfully, Captain James L. Harper, U.S. Army. She read the letter twice. Then she placed it on her bedside table beside the coins. She didn't frame it. She didn't post about it. She just kept it close as proof that even one act, one choice, could ripple further than anyone could imagine. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Sarah stood by the window watching the base lights twinkle in the distance. She thought about that morning, about smoke and fear, and the boy's voice calling out for help, about the weight of the truck and the strength she never knew she had. And she thought about the silence afterward, the salute of 500 soldiers standing not for power or rank, but for humanity. Her hand rested over her heart, and she whispered softly to herself, a truth she had come to understand in every quiet moment since. Sometimes the smallest act echoes the loudest. Outside, a flag rippled in the wind, steady, enduring, alive. And in the reflection of the window, the faint shimmer of the challenge coins caught the moonlight. They didn't shine because they were polished. They shone because they were given. It started with a letter, then another, then 100 more. They came from everywhere: schools, families, veterans, strangers. Some addressed to Mrs. Martinez, the nurse who lifted a truck. Others simply to the hero of Fort Harrison. Sarah read every one she could, not out of pride, but because every letter felt like a heartbeat, a reminder of how her single act had somehow awakened something far beyond her own life. Children wrote about courage. Veterans wrote about faith. Mothers wrote about gratitude. Each message carried its own quiet truth, each one echoing the same sentiment. You reminded us that goodness still exists. And yet, every time she read the word hero, Sarah felt a small, stubborn ache. She didn't feel like one, not even close. She hadn't planned her actions that day. She hadn't calculated risk or imagined honor. She'd just seen a boy in pain and refused to stand still. But now the world was watching her, defining her by one impossible moment. And sometimes, late at night, she wondered whether anyone would understand that she hadn't been fearless. She'd been terrified. The strength people praised hadn't come from certainty. It had come from desperation, from love, from instinct, from humanity itself. And that, she thought, was the most misunderstood kind of courage of all. By mid-September, her story had reached classrooms. Teachers used her name in lessons about character and empathy. At a nearby elementary school, a fifth grader stood before his class, holding a photo of her clipped from the newspaper. She didn't wait for someone to tell her what to do, he said proudly. She just did it. His teacher smiled. And what does that teach us? The boy thought for a moment. That bravery is when you move before fear tells you not to. Somewhere across town, Sarah was sitting quietly in her kitchen when she received a video link from one of those teachers. She clicked play and listened as dozens of small voices read letters aloud. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for helping someone when you didn't have to. Thank you for showing that one person can make a difference. By the end of the video, Sarah's eyes were wet. Mike found her there, sitting still, tears running down her cheeks, her coffee long gone cold. They shouldn't be thanking me, she whispered. They should be thanking every soldier who stands out there in the cold, every nurse who stays up all night saving lives. He sat beside her, taking her hand. Maybe they're thanking you for reminding them of those people, for making them see it again. She nodded slowly, maybe. The invitation started soon after. Town council, schools, veterans groups, community centers. Everyone wanted her to speak. At first, she said no to all of them. Public speaking wasn't her world. She'd always been content working behind the scenes, steady, quiet, unseen. But then one letter arrived that changed her mind. It was from a young woman, a soldier's widow. "I lost my husband 2 years ago in Afghanistan. When I read what you did, it hurt at first. It reminded me of everything I'd lost. But then, it gave me something back, faith. Faith that there are still people who run toward others when danger comes. Please don't hide your voice. Some of us need to hear it." Sarah sat with that letter for hours. That night she told Mike, "Maybe I'll say yes to one, just one." Her first speaking event was small, a community gathering at the local armory. She stood at the podium in a simple gray dress, her hair pinned back, a thin scar still visible above her temple. The audience, soldiers, families, civilians, filled the hall. Cameras flashed, but she barely noticed. When the applause faded, she stood there for a long moment, gripping the edge of the podium, unsure how to begin. Then she spoke softly at first, then with a steady rhythm born from honesty, not performance. "I don't know how to explain what happened that morning," she said. "I just know that something inside me refused to walk away. People call it courage, but I think it was something simpler, compassion maybe, or love." She paused, searching faces in the crowd. "I didn't plan to be there. I didn't think about danger. I just saw someone in pain and acted. And if that's heroism, then every nurse, every soldier, every parent who sacrifices something for someone else is a hero too." Her voice cracked on the next words. "I don't think we need to wait for big moments to be brave. I think bravery is just choosing kindness when it costs you something." Silence filled the room, and then applause, not the loud, performative kind, the real kind, the kind that came from understanding. When she stepped down from the stage, several soldiers approached her. One, a young woman in fatigues, shook her hand with trembling fingers. "I was losing faith," she said quietly, "in people, in why I joined, but after hearing you, I remember now." Sarah smiled gently, touched the soldier's arm. "Then it was worth it." In the months that followed, Sarah's story began to take on a life of its own. Documentaries, news specials, portraits painted by veterans groups, a short film shown at the Pentagon's annual recognition ceremony. But through all of it, she stayed the same, humble, grounded, almost resistant to the light being shined on her. Whenever reporters asked how it felt to be famous, she always said the same thing. "I'm not famous, I'm just grateful." She didn't chase the cameras. She didn't give speeches about strength or power. Instead, she spoke about care, about humanity, about the quiet moments when choices define us more than words ever could. People listened, not because she was loud, but because she was honest. Rodriguez visited often. His leg had healed well, though the scar remained, a constant reminder of that morning. They would sit on her porch, coffee steaming in their hands, watching the sunset settle over the hills. "You know they're still talking about you at the base," he said one evening. "I wish they stop," she replied, smiling softly. He laughed, "Good luck with that." Then quieter, "You changed something there, you know. It's like people remember what it means to serve again. Even the young recruits, they train harder, talk different. You made them believe in why they wear the uniform." Sarah looked down at her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "All I did was lift a truck." Rodriguez shook his head. "No, ma'am, you lifted something bigger, us." One afternoon, Sarah received a package from an address she didn't recognize. Inside was a folded American flag, carefully wrapped in cloth, and a letter written in formal, cursive script. "Mrs. Martinez, this flag was flown over our base during a deployment in the Middle East. It has seen things most people never will. The soldiers under my command wanted it to find a home where courage lives, not in uniform, but in heart. Please accept it as a symbol of the bond between those who serve and those who care enough to stand beside them. Respectfully, Call Daniel Reeves, U.S. Army. Sarah pressed the flag to her chest, her eyes wet with tears she couldn't hold back. She placed it in her living room, beside the plaque and the coins, her quiet shrine of remembrance and gratitude. But one night months later, she stood in that same room looking at the collection. Each coin reflected a different story, each flower petal long since dried but still fragrant. Each letter, folded carefully into a box, held a piece of someone's heart. The plaque's polished surface caught her reflection. She didn't see a hero there. She saw a woman who had learned what it meant to act, not for glory but for grace. And in that reflection, she finally understood the meaning of what those 500 soldiers had shown her that morning, what their silence, their salute, their unbroken formation had truly said. It wasn't gratitude for strength, it was recognition of spirit. Because in every soldier's heart, there exists a quiet prayer that when the world burns, someone, anyone, will still choose compassion over comfort. And on that morning, without knowing it, Sarah Martinez had answered that prayer. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the flag gently. Sarah smiled, her voice a whisper to the night. If one person sees this and remembers to care, that's enough. And as the moonlight touched the coins and the brass plaque, they shimmered softly, not with grandeur, but with the quiet dignity of a promise kept. Because courage, she knew now, wasn't about what you did once. It was about what you kept carrying after. And she would carry it, humbly, silently, endlessly. Years passed. The world kept spinning, new wars, new names, new stories of courage and loss. But somewhere near Fort Harrison, in a small white house at the edge of the pines, the legend of one morning still lingered like a whisper carried on the wind. Sarah Martinez never sought the word legend. To her, it sounded too heavy, too final. She preferred the ordinary rhythms of life, the soft creak of the front porch, the hiss of the coffee pot, the sound of soldiers training in the distance. She'd gone back to work long ago, though not quite the same way. In the emergency room, people sometimes recognized her. They'd look at her a little too long before saying, "You're her, aren't you?" She'd smile, shake her head gently, and reply, "I'm just Sarah." And then she'd get back to work. Because there were always new lives to save, new hands to hold, new moments where someone had to choose to stay instead of walk away. That was the part she never stopped believing in, the choice. Rodriguez had stayed in the Army. He'd recovered fully, returned to active duty, and deployed twice. Each time he wrote her a letter from the field, signed with the same line. "Still here thanks to you." He visited every year on the anniversary of the accident. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with his squad. One year he brought his wife and baby daughter. The little girl had his dark eyes and Sarah's calm smile. When she reached for Sarah's finger and held it tightly, Sarah felt something warm and wordless pass between them, a continuity of life that no medal or ceremony could ever capture. That moment mattered more to her than any salute ever could. The collection of challenge coins grew over time. Every few months, another envelope would arrive, sometimes from a stranger, sometimes from a base overseas, sometimes from a soldier she'd once treated in the ER who had learned her story. Each coin told a silent story of connection. A pilot's coin from a squadron in Qatar. A medic's coin from a field unit in Ukraine. A special forces insignia with a note that simply read, "You remind us what we fight for." She kept them in a glass case by the window, not to show them off, but to remind herself that courage was contagious, that when one person stood up, others found their footing too. Sometimes she'd run her fingers along the coins, tracing their edges, remembering each hand that had placed them there. Not trophies, not honors, just echoes of gratitude. But her story was still told in military circles, though it had become less about the miracle and more about the meaning. Recruits at Fort Harrison heard it during orientation. The instructors didn't dramatize it. They simply said, "A civilian once reminded this base what duty really means." Some soldiers visited the hospital where it happened, touching the old oak near the parking lot where the tribute had taken place. The staff had planted flowers there, and every spring, yellow tulips bloomed, the color of hope, bright against the gray of concrete. A small plaque sat at the base of the tree. It read, "To the nurse who lifted more than a truck, you lifted us all." Sarah had never asked for it. She only learned about it years later when a young soldier knocked on her door with a photo. She stared at it for a long moment, tears forming quietly. Then she smiled. "I hope they watered those flowers," she said. But the world had changed in the years since that day. Technology advanced, wars came and went, names filled and faded from headlines. But the story of the nurse who lifted a soldier to life remained, not as a viral video or a headline, but as a piece of oral history told from one generation of soldiers to the next. It became something more than fact. It became a lesson. Courage isn't always about combat, instructors would say. Sometimes it's about compassion under fire, about doing the impossible because you can't imagine doing nothing. And somewhere, someone would whisper her name, not to glorify her, but to remember her choice. But on the 10th anniversary, Fort Harrison invited her back. She hadn't been on base since the day of the salute. The thought of stepping into that space again made her nervous, but Mike encouraged her gently. "They just want to see you," he said. "It's not about ceremony, it's about gratitude." When they arrived, the base commander, a new face, younger but clearly reverent, met her at the gate. "Mrs. Martinez," he said warmly, "it's an honor to have you back. You probably don't realize how many people you've inspired here." Sarah smiled. "I think they inspired me far more than I did them." He guided her through the base, past training fields, barracks, and the memorial wall. Soldiers stopped and saluted as she passed. Not a loud, formal salute, a quiet, personal one. Each one met her eyes, each one smiled. When they reached the oak tree, she froze. The flowers were blooming again, brighter than she remembered, and beneath the plaque a new addition, a small engraved plate. "In honor of Sarah Martinez, civilian nurse, protector, friend. Proof that courage has no uniform." She didn't speak. She simply reached out and touched the plaque, the metal cool beneath her fingertips. Rodriguez was there too, standing a few steps away with his family. He didn't say anything either. He didn't have to. Sometimes silence said everything. But that evening the base held a small dinner, intimate, unannounced. No press, no speeches, just shared stories. A group of young soldiers approached her, their uniforms crisp, their faces earnest. One of them, barely old enough to remember the event, asked quietly, "Ma'am, when you lifted that truck, what were you thinking?" Sarah smiled softly, the question taking her back to the smell of smoke, the sound of gunfire, the terror in Rodriguez's eyes. "I wasn't thinking," she said. "I was just feeling. I saw someone who needed help and everything else disappeared." The young man nodded, absorbing every word. She looked around at them. These young soldiers standing straight and proud, hearts full of ideals she recognized from long ago. "You'll learn something about courage," she said gently. "It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers go. Sometimes it's a choice you make when no one's watching. And sometimes it's the quiet strength to keep caring in a world that tells you not to." The room was silent when she finished. And for the briefest moment, Sarah saw her younger self reflected in their eyes, afraid, uncertain, but unwilling to turn away. But years later, when she finally retired from nursing, Sarah still woke early every morning just as she always had. She'd walk the same trail near the base, slower now, but steady. Sometimes she'd pause where it had all begun, near the bend where she'd first heard the gunfire that morning. The grass had grown back. The scars in the dirt were long gone, but when she stood there, she could still feel it, the echo of that moment, the heartbeat of courage that had changed her forever. She'd close her eyes, breathe deeply, and whisper, "Thank you," to no one and everyone at once. But Rodriguez eventually became a sergeant himself. When he retired, he and his family settled nearby. Their children grew up calling Sarah Auntie. Every year on the anniversary, they'd gather, no ceremonies, no cameras. Just a quiet dinner, laughter, and remembrance. One evening, his teenage son asked, "Dad, what really happened that day? Did she really lift a truck?" Rodriguez smiled, glancing at Sarah across the table. "She did," he said, "but that's not the important part." "Then what is?" the boy asked. Rodriguez's eyes softened. "That she didn't have to." Sarah looked down, tears stinging her eyes. "You make me sound braver than I was." Rodriguez smiled. "You were exactly brave enough." But as years turned into decades, the story outgrew them all. At the base museum, a small exhibit appeared, a modest display with her photo, the plaque, and one of her coins. Above it, a single quote engraved in steel. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Visitors would stop there, soldiers, families, civilians, and fall silent. Not in awe, but in respect. Because even long after her hands had healed and her scars had faded, the lesson she left behind remained. That real strength isn't about what the world sees. It's about what the heart decides when no one's watching. And in the end, that's how people remembered her. Not as the woman who lifted a truck. Not as the civilian who became a hero. But as someone who reminded them that courage doesn't always wear boots. Sometimes it wears running shoes. In the stillness of her final years, when the world outside had grown quieter, Sarah often sat by the window, the sun filtering through lace curtains, catching on the edges of those coins her small constellation of memories. Each glint of light carried a story. Each reflection a reminder. And when people came to visit, soldiers, nurses, students, and asked her what it all meant, she always smiled and said, "It means one thing: never underestimate the power of simply caring." Then softly, as if speaking to herself, she'd add, "Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not look away." Outside, the flag she'd been given years ago fluttered in the wind, quiet, proud, enduring. And for those who passed by her little house near Fort Harrison, they'd sometimes hear faint laughter, faint music, faint stories told through the open window. But when they stopped and listened closely, what they felt most wasn't sound at all. It was peace. The kind born not from fame or glory, but from a single act of grace that had never stopped echoing. Because Sarah Martinez hadn't just lifted a soldier that morning. She had lifted a nation's heart and reminded it what it meant to be human. And that they would never forget.